Hi everyone, this is Valerie Szybala, Executive Director of the Syria Institute, and I am here to do our second installment of our new Q&A video series where we take reader questions and try and answer them for you. I would like to give the caveat that TSI does not take organizational positions on policy issues. And so the following is my own analysis based on my understanding of the conflict and things that I read, and is not a policy position taken by the organization. So today we are going to answer a question that was asked by Sean McGrath, and it has to do with the Syrian map and territorial integrity of the country in the future. So the question is the reunification of Syria as it was pre-2011 realistic? Or are there talks of redrawing borders and recreating states? If so, what would that look like? Also, now that the Kurds have been playing a more autonomous and decision-maker role, will they seek in earnest to create a Kurdish state? Thank you, Sean, for the question. So it was obviously multiple questions all in one. I will take them bit by bit. So the first two parts, is the reunification of Syria pre-2011 possible, or are there talks of redrawing boundaries and recreating states? The answer to both of those, in my opinion, is no. Syria is probably not going to look like it did before the conflict in the near future. I also don't think that there are talks of redrawing boundaries and recreating states. I think that what you're going to end up with is maybe less clear-cut, something in between, fragmented. The Syria right now is fragmented, but to understand the positions of the players on the ground, both sides, of the primary two sides in the conflict, if you want to take that view of it, both the Syrian government and the mainstream political and military opposition reject the idea of autonomous regions, certainly of breaking Syria up. They want to maintain the territorial integrity of the state. You might have heard Assad say he's going to retake the whole country by force, and Syria under the Assad regime was traditionally a very centralized state. It doesn't mean they won't allow, in his view, for some more forms of maybe local governance, but I assume that they would still have a pretty strong state grip on power. The opposition has as well said no to a breakup of the state, and both of those sides were come out strongly against the declaration that the Kurds made for their own autonomous zone in the north, and have both continued to state their opposition to really fragmentation of the state. Now, the reasons that Syrians themselves, particularly Syrian Arabs, and in this I'm not really talking about the Kurds who are part of the autonomous zone. One reason that Syrians don't want to see autonomous zones or a breakup of the state, well, they're very suspicious of the idea of decentralization, is because they ultimately believe, hold on one second, that it will lead to a partition of the country and maybe the breakup of the state. And this has, for those familiar with the Middle East, has a pretty sordid negative connotation. Oh, we're back. As I was saying, there's a pretty negative connotation associated with redrawing boundaries. And a lot, for the same reason, Syrians are often, the players on the ground are often really antagonistic to the idea even of a decentralized government, because they suspect that ultimately it will lead in that direction. At the same time, we know that it's not just Syrians involved in the Syrian conflict. All the parties have backers with their own interests, and this complicates things even further. Most of the international players, the backers, would be fine with, if not some form, definitely some form of decentralized rule, federalism. In fact, Russia even proposed a federalism in a constitution it proposed for Syria in December. The EU has said it supports a form of decentralized rule. I think most countries, the US, would support that. Some backers would probably, even though they haven't said it out loud, be fine with a partition and breakup of the country as long as their interests remain intact. So for Turkey, at this point, they would love to hang on to this buffer zone they've created in part of the border in the north to prevent the Kurds from creating a one whole state along the boundary. I think Iran needs to keep Damascus area and this pathway open to Lebanon for its supplies to Hezbollah, although its goals in Syria have expanded as it's met with success. This Russian zone of influence on the coast. So as long as these players can maintain what they've gained in the conflict, I don't think they have a particular desire or affinity for, the form of maybe severity with which the Syrian government and the opposition both say they want one unified Syria. Other players may not care quite as much. Now, the second part of the question is about the Kurds and will they seek to create a Kurdish state? It is interesting to note that the Kurds have gone ahead and created a decentralized federal system of their own, an autonomous zone in the north, and they're moving towards, governance, although it's not clear that they currently have the economic resources to really govern on their own for all of the area that they've claimed. But so far, the Kurds in the north have not called for a new state of their own. They have said they want to remain part of Syria as an autonomous zone. What I think that it's likely that this will result in is something like what you see in Iraq, where there is an autonomous Kurdish zone. It functions pretty much on its own, although it is technically still part of Iraq. I wouldn't be surprised if this happened in Syria. So I don't think there is talk of getting out a map and redrawing boundaries. I don't see in the near future any scenario where it turns into Yugoslavia and breaks up. But the reality on the ground, the de facto reality is it's fragmented, and as military powers stake out their zones of influence, the changes on the ground are leading itself towards a fragmented state for the near future. There's a natural sorting of people because of the conflict, sometimes along sectarian lines or ethnic lines. There's also an intentional demographic engineering effort. We've seen all these population transfers, particularly the Syrian government and its allies are undertaking to cement their own power bases in areas they see as core to the Syrian state. You're also seeing some demographic engineering efforts in Kurdish-controlled areas and in ISIS-controlled areas. In some parts of the country, like in the Kurdish areas, people are instituting new curriculums and using different languages. And the longer that these things go on, the harder it's going to be to unify Syria into pre-2011. But I think it will stop short of complete breakup. One idea that's out there right now, and has been for a while, is the idea of creating safe zones. If you did, I think that this would speed up the process of creating a de facto federal state or different zones of control, because anywhere that these safe zones would be set up would be in a current military zone. In the north, certainly it would benefit Kurdish ambitions or Turkish ambitions, depending on which part of the north. In the south, I think it could benefit the opposition, potentially Jordan, although it's been unwilling to get directly involved. So it may not be the most satisfying, clear-cut answer, but the answer is somewhere in between. Syria is going to be messy, and ultimately, if Syrians can get over their fear of decentralization, I think that a decentral system of government with more empowerment of local areas is maybe a realistic path for the long term. As a resource, I'm going to recommend a survey that was done by the Day After Project in April of last year. It was an opinion survey on attitudes for federalism, decentralization, and the experience of democratic self-administration, the Kurdish zones. looking at what Syrians in different parts of the countries thought about this, and they come to the conclusion that local decentralized rule of some sort is desirable by most Syrians, but not complete federal rule. But these numbers are flipped when you look at Kurds who live in the current autonomous zone. So we will include a link to that resource and to our YouTube page in the comments. At the YouTube page, you can see this and all the other videos that we have done or will do. And that's it for now. Thank you very much, and we look forward to doing another video.